Hey everyone, welcome to another puzzle explanations video. Today I will be going over the solutions and the thought process behind solving the Rhodochrine Tree Puzzle in Pokemon Reborn. That is a puzzle that you go through while climbing Rhodochrine Tree in part 1 of the Xerneas and Yveltal quest. And because this puzzle involves a lot of keeping track of a lot of numbers, I'm not really going to be showing any gameplay here. I decided to just present this thought process using slides because I think that'd be clearer. And over the course of this video, this process of solving involves using sort of a mix of algebra and logic, and I'll try to make the process very clear and systematic. And as a result, some of it may be a bit more complicated than it needs to be. But in the spirit of clarity, that's the route that I decided to go. So without further ado, let's begin with the first room. So at the beginning, because Eve's tablet isn't working yet, we don't really get a lot of information on what we're even supposed to do. But just from observing the room on the first floor, we see that there are certain Pokemon that are light-colored roaming around and others that are dark-colored. Specifically, on the light side, we see 3 Espeon just roaming around the room, and on the dark side, we see 2 Umbreon. And while Eve's busy trying to fix the issue with the tablet, Noelle mentioned that there is an obvious odd one happening. And with 3 Espeon and 2 Umbreon, hopefully we can just come to the conclusion that we may want to defeat one of the odd ones out to balance the light and the dark side, so there are 2 Pokemon on each side. So yeah, with this information, the solution is just to defeat 1 Espeon. And as a result, we see after we defeat 1 Espeon, there will be 2 Espeon. So the result, we sort of balance the 2 sides. There are 2 Espeon on the light side and 2 Umbreon on the dark side. And when we do that, we solve this room and we're ready to move on to the second. And now that Eve's tablet is finally working, we actually get information on what we're supposed to do. So Eve explains that there's anomalous and umbral energies, those are the light and dark energies respectively that we observed in the previous room, that need to be balanced. And every Pokemon is assigned some power value that is a prime number between 1 and 20. And this is a list of all of such prime numbers. So every Pokemon throughout this entire puzzle has some power value that is one of these listed numbers. And based on the color of the Pokemon we see in the overworld, their power is the amount by which they contribute to the total anomalous or umbral energy. So the total anomalous energy in the room, for example, would be the sum of the power values of all light-colored Pokemon. And our goal is to defeat Pokemon selectively in a way that balances the anomalous and umbral sides. And the result should be that the total power on the anomalous side and the total power on the umbral side should be an equivalent non-zero number. Obviously, if we defeat every Pokemon, then they will be balanced because they'll both have 0 power, but I believe that you can't solve the puzzle this way. So now that we know what we're supposed to do, let's go over what information we're given. So when we look around the room, the Pokemon present, we see on the anomalous side there are 2 Chingling and 1 Espeon, and on the umbral side there is 1 Mightyena. And for all of these rooms, we are given the total initial power on both sides. On the anomalous side, the total power initially is 7, and on the umbral side, the total power initially is 5. And Eve also gives us the power values of certain Pokemon. We know that Espeon has a power of 3, Chingling has a power of 2, and Mightyena has a power of 5. So how may we selectively defeat Pokemon such that the anomalous and umbral powers become balanced? So using this information, we could probably deduce that the solution is to defeat one Chingling. And I'll explain why that balance is. So defeating one Chingling drops the total anomalous power down to 5. It's because 7 is the initial anomalous power, and when we subtract 2, which is the power value of the Chingling we defeated, the result is 5. And we didn't defeat any umbral Pokemon, so the umbral power stays 5. So now that the anomalous and umbral power are both 5, and they're the same non-zero value, we balance the two sides, we solve this room, and we can move on. And now we get to the third room, and just from walking around, we see that on the anomalous side there's one Togetic, and on the umbral side there's one Umbreon and one Mismagius. And the initial powers given, the anomalous power totals to 7, and the umbral power totals to 10. And given power values or power values that we've previously determined that's relevant to solving this room, is that Espeon has a power of 3 and Togetic has a power of 7. And we don't know anymore because Eve unfortunately gets trapped by growing vines after telling us this information, and Noelle does not know how to read the power values of individual Pokemon. So for the rest of this puzzle, it is up to us to figure out the power values necessary to figure out a solution to this puzzle. So the first step is we have to determine Umbreon's power because we don't know that. The best way to figure that out is let's go back to the course of events that we went through back in room 1. So remember, initially in that room, there were 3 Espeons. Those were anomalous, and 2 Umbreons, which were umbral. So the total anomalous power that there were initially, that is 3 times 3, because there were 3 Espeons, and each Espeon had a power of 3, so there were 9. But in order to balance the anomalous power with the umbral power, we defeated one Umbreon. So subtract 3, the power of one Espeon, from the total of 9, and we get 6. So right at the moment we solved this room, the total amount of anomalous power was 6. And because a condition for solving a room is that the anomalous and umbral powers must be equal, the umbral power after solving the room at that moment must also be 6. And the initial umbral power must be 6 as well, because we never defeated any umbral Pokemon in this room. And so we can write an equation setting for the initial conditions. There were 2 Umbreons, so we can set 6, the total umbral power initially, equal to 2, which is the number of Umbreons, times x, which is the Umbreon's power. And we're going to use x here because we don't know Umbreon's power, so we'll just put a variable. And now with just simple algebra, we can solve for x, and we get that Umbreon has a power of 3. So now we know that Umbreon has a power value of 3. And this was a very systematic way to figure this out, and a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. Another approach could have been to use intuition, just the fact that back in the first room we were treating Espeon and Umbreon as having equal weight against each other, and now we know that Espeon has a power value of 3, Umbreon also has a power of 3. But this was a nice systematic way to figure this out. So now we have all the information we need to solve this room. Let's add our newfound knowledge of Umbreon's power to the list of given information. So the solution to balance the two sides is all we need to do is defeat one Umbreon. The anomalous power remains 7 because we never defeated any Pokemon on the anomalous side, and the umbral power drops to 7. That's because we started at 10, we defeated an Umbreon, which had 3, so we subtracted 3 from 10, and the result is 7. Anomalous and Umbral is the same non-zero value, now they're balanced. Okay, and before we move on to room 4, we can calculate a little bit of bonus information. Let's figure out Miss Magius's power. We didn't need to know this to solve this room, but this information might be helpful for future rooms because the power values of each Pokemon stays consistent from floor to floor. So, after solving this room, on the Umbral side, there is only one Miss Magius left, and the Umbral power dropped to 7. So, based on the state of the room upon solving this puzzle, we can set 7, which is the total final Umbral power, equal to the power of Miss Magius, because, again, Miss Magius is the only Umbral Pokemon present at that moment. And we don't know Miss Magius's power, so we'll just put X for that. And we don't even really need to rearrange this equation, we just see right away that the power of Miss Magius has to be 7. Okay, now let's move forward to room 4. So what information are we given? So by looking around, on the anomalous side, there's 1 Togetic, 1 Espeon, and 1 Cleffa. And on the Umbral side, there are 2 Miss Magius. And initial powers given for the 2 sides, anomalous is 12 and Umbral is 14. And previously determined power values that will be relevant for solving this room is Togetic has power 7, Espeon is 3, and Miss Magius is 7. So first let's figure out Cleffa's power. And we can write an equation based on the total anomalous power and the power values of the anomalous Pokemon present in this room that we know. We set 12, the total equal to 7 the power of Togetic, plus 3 the power of Espeon, plus X the power of Cleffa. And we're setting X again because we don't know the power of Cleffa. And this is because there is 1 Togetic, 1 Espeon, and 1 Cleffa contributing to the anomalous energy in this room. And here we have 1 equation and 1 unknown, so pretty easy, we just solve for X and we get that the power of Cleffa must be 2. And that's all the information we need to know for room 4, and yeah, let's add that Cleffa equals 2 to the relevant information that we need. So the solution is to defeat 1 Espeon, 1 Cleffa, and 1 Miss Magius to balance powers. That's because in doing so, the anomalous power drops to 7 because we start at 12, we defeat 1 Espeon, which is 3, we defeat 1 Cleffa, which is 2, we subtract those from 12, we get 7. The Umbral power drops to 7 as well. We defeat 1 Miss Magius, which contributed 7 to the Umbral energy that was initially 14, so after subtracting it, the resulting total Umbral power is 7. 2 sides are balanced, they're the same non-zero value, the room is solved, we can move on. Now room 5. What information are we given? So the Pokemon present, on the anomalous side, there's 1 Flabebe, 1 Floette, and 1 Florges, and none of them are Pokemon that we've encountered before. On the Umbral side, we see 3 Umbreon roaming around. And the initial powers given by Noel, when we talk to him, is that on the anomalous side, the power totals to 10, and on the Umbral side, the powers total to 9. And relevant power values that will be helpful for solving this room is that Umbreon has a power of 3. Now, to solve this, starting with this room, there is one inference that we need to make that we're not really told right away, but a few rooms down the line, Noel sort of hints at it, and it is the pattern, and this stays true for all of these rooms, the pattern that for every evolutionary line, Pokemon that are later in that evolutionary line have a larger power than Pokemon that are earlier in that line. For example, let's consider the Pidgey's evolutionary line. By this rule, the amount of power that Pidgey contributes to the total anomalous or umbral energy must be less than the amount of power that Pidgeotto contributes, and that must be less than the amount of power that Pidgeot contributes. And I guess this inference can come sort of from the intuition that that as Pokemon evolve, they're growing stronger, so they should probably contribute more power. Yeah, that's the best reasoning I can think of. But anyway, using this rule and the information we know, let's figure out how the 10 power units on the anomalous side are distributed among the light Pokemon. So by the inference that we established in a previous slide, and this is the Flabebe evolutionary line, we know that because Flabebe evolves into Floette and Floette evolves into Florges, the power that Flabebe contributes must be less than the power that Floette contributes, and that must be less than the power that Florges contributes. And one implication from this rule also is that those powers are not equal, so they have to be distinct from each other. So let's write our equation. 10 is the total power, and we can set that equal to x plus y plus z, and each of them represents the power that one Pokemon contributes. We're using different variables because they're all unknowns, and they may be different unknowns. And there's also the constraint that x must be less than y, and y must be less than z. So to figure this out, we have to ask the question, what are 3 distinct prime numbers that add up to 10? And the only option for this is the 3 smallest primes, 2, 3, and 5. So 2 plus 3 and 5, and to satisfy those inequalities, x must equal 2, y must equal 3, and z must equal 5. So Flabebe, because that is x, Flabebe contributes 2 power units to the anomalous energy, Floette contributes 3 because Floette's y, and Florges contributes 5. So those are the powers of those 3 Pokemon. And let's add that to our known information, and we can now begin to solve this room. So again, how do we balance the two types of energy? So the solution is to defeat 1 Flabebe, 1 Florges, and 2 Umbreon. In doing so, the anomalous power drops to 3 because 10, the initial, minus 2, the amount that Flabebe contributed, minus 5, the amount that Florges contributed, equals 3. So that would be the result after defeating those Pokemon. And the Umbral power drops to 3 because we start at 9, we defeat 2 Umbreon, so we subtract 2 times 3, and the result is 3. And once again, we're balanced, we can move on. Now, room 6. What are we given? We're given that on the anomalous side, from walking around, there are 2 Floette, 1 Florges, 1 Chingling, 2 Espeon, and 1 Granbull. And on the Umbral side, there are 2 Zweilous. And the total initial power we're given, on the anomalous side, it's a whopping 30, and on the Umbral side, it's a whopping 26. And relevant power values that we figured out previously that might help us, Floette is 3, Florges is 5, just from the previous room, Chingling is 2, and Espeon is 3. So the first step, let's figure out how much power that a single Zweilous is contributing to the Umbral energy. So we can write an equation because in this room the Umbral energy is only composed of 2 Zweilous. We can set the total of 26 equal to 2 times x, which is the unknown power value of Zweilous. And then we can go solve for x. X equals 13. So we now know that 1 Zweilous is contributing 13 power units to the Umbral energy. And that's all we need to know to figure this out. So to balance the 2 sides in this room, we have to defeat 2 Floette, 1 Florges, 2 Espeon, and 1 Zweilous. In doing so, the anomalous power drops to 13. Yeah, because we start at 30, we subtract 2 times 3 to account for the floette, we subtract 5 to account for the Florges, and we subtract 2 times 3 to account for the Espeon, we get 13. The Umbral power drops to 13, because, yeah, we start at 26, and by defeating one Zweilous, we subtract 13 to get 13. So, we're balanced. And some bonus information that will help us for upcoming rooms. Let's figure out the power that Granbull holds. So the total amount of anomalous energy after solving this room was 13, and the only anomalous Pokemon remaining were one Chingling and one Granbull. We already know that Chingling has a power of 2, so we can set the total of 13 equal to 2 plus our unknown power for Granbull. We're setting that for X. We solve for X, we get that Granbull has a power of 11. And we can use that information in the future. Alright, for the 7th room, what are we given? So from walking around, on the anomalous side, we see 2 Kadabra and 1 Spritzee. And on the Umbral side, we see 1 Houndour, 1 Zweilous, and 1 Murkrow. The total initial power we're given on the anomalous side is 24, and on the Umbral side is 21. And the only power value that we previously determined that's going to help us is Zweilous, which we've established has a power of 13. So first step, let's figure out what is the power of Spritzee. And let's set up our equation for the anomalous side. Total of 24 equals 2 times X, which were the variable for our unknown value of Kadabra's power, plus Y, our unknown value of Spritzee's power. And to solve for Spritzee's power, we got to solve for Y. So we get that Y equals, upon rearranging the equation, that Y equals 24 minus 2 times X. We know that all the power values have to be some kind of integer, so 2 times X, or 2 times any integer, has to be some even number. That's just math rules. So we know that Spritzee's power must be 24 minus some even number, and an even number, 24 minus an even number, is still an even number, so Spritzee's power has to be even. We also know, just from the very beginning, that the Spritzee's power has to be prime, and the only even prime number is 2, so that eliminates every possible answer except 2, so Spritzee has to have a power of 2. And then next we can use our newfound information to figure out Kadabra's power, because if we go back to this equation, we substitute Y we substitute 2 for Y. Now it's one equation, one unknown, we can just solve it, and we get that Kadabra's power is 11. And next, we can't figure out the exact values of Houndour and Murkrow's power in this room, but we can get more information about it. So let's do that. This is the equation on the Umbral side. The total of 21 is equivalent to X, which is Houndour's power, which is unknown, plus 13, which is the known value of Zweilous' power, plus Y, which is our unknown value or variable for Murkrow's power. Again, that's just summing up all of the Umbral Pokemon present in this room that are contributing to the Umbral power of 21. So if we solve for X plus Y, we get 8. So the combined contribution of Houndour and Murkrow to the Umbral energy is 8. So, as far as what Houndour and Murkrow's power are individually, we know they have to be prime, and they have to add up to 8. So we have to think of what 2 prime numbers add up to 8. The only option is 3 plus 5. So, between Houndour and Murkrow, one of them has a power of 3, and one of them has a power of 5. So, Houndour's power is either 3 or 5, Murkrow's power is either 3 or 5, and that is all we know. But that's all we need to know to solve this room. So the solution to balance the two sides is to defeat one Kadabra, one Houndour, and one Murkrow. In doing so, that's because in doing so, the anomalous power drops to 13, 24, the initial anomalous power, minus the 11, the power that the Kadabra that we defeated contributed. The result is 13 on the anomalous side. And on the Umbral side, we start at 21. When we defeat the Houndour and the Murkrow, we know that combined they contributed 8 units of power on the Umbral side. So we can just subtract 8 from the total, and we get that the result was 13. And we're balanced on the two sides. Okay, next is room 8, and this one is a doozy. So let's get into it. What are we given? So by the Pokemon that we see, on the anomalous side, there's one Granbull and one Togetic, and on the Umbral side, there's one Houndour, one Drifloon, and one Mandibuzz. And initially, there's 18 total power units on the anomalous side, and 24 on the Umbral side. And relevant power values that we previously determined that will help us is Granbull is 11, Togetic is 7, and Houndour is either 3 or 5. So for these last two rooms, part of the reasoning for figuring this out relies on making an assumption. And this assumption, I think, is pretty reasonable for the game. And the assumption is that a solution exists. Like, there is actually a way to do this room. And more precisely, there exists a way to balance the anomalous and umbral side solely by defeating Pokemon, like 0 or more Pokemon, without defeating all the Pokemon. So, as a result, if we ever make any supposition that would result in a circumstance where there is no possible solution, in other words, no possible way to balance the two sides, that supposition must be false. If you've ever heard of or worked with proof by contradictions, this is the exact reasoning for it. And that's reasoning that I will employ in these last two puzzles, or last two rooms. So let's get into it. For room 8, what can we do? Well, first we can determine all possible values that the anomalous power can be after solving. That is, all possible ways that we can reduce the anomalous power by 0 or more units by defeating 0 or more anomalous Pokemon. And yeah, they're all discrete values because every Pokemon is some number, so there are only certain values that the anomalous power can ever be. So we know, from our equation, 18 is the total, we know Granbull is 11, we know Togetic is 7, it all checks out. And we know that after solving, by defeating 0 more Pokemon, that the total anomalous power must be some combination of up to 1 Granbull and up to 1 Togetic. That represents the Pokemon that will be remaining after defeating the other Pokemon. And the possible values for that are 0, 7, 11, and 18. And we established that we can't have 0 because that's just no energy. So, as far as balancing goes, the only possible ways that we can balance is to reduce both powers to either 7, 11, or 18, because the anomalous power cannot be reduced to any other number. So, with that in mind, let's add that to our known information and figure out what is actually Houndour's power. Is it 3 or 5? So suppose that the power is 3. So let's just assume for now that 3 is the correct answer for Houndour's power. Then we can write our equation for the umbral side, set 24, the total, equal to the sum of the power values of the Pokemon that contribute to it. 3 which we've established is Houndour's power plus X Drifloon plus Y Mandibuzz, and variables again for the Pokemon that we don't know. We can solve for X plus Y, and that's 21, so the combined contribution of Drifloon and Mandibuzz is 21. And again, we know each power value has to be prime, so let's think of what are two prime numbers that add up to 21. And there's only one option for that, and that is 2 plus 19. And we can be sure that that is the only option because just from math rules, 21 is an odd number. So if we think of two whole numbers that add up to 21, one of them has to be odd and one of them has to be even. And if one of them has to be even and that number has to be prime, and the only even prime is 2, then the even number has to be 2 and the odd number has to be what's left after subtracting 2 from the total. So that's how we get 2 plus 19. So between Drifloon and Mandibuzz, one of them would have to be 2 and one of them would have to be 19. So the total umbral energy after solving would have to be some combination of the umbral Pokemon there, which if we use the values, the power values of 2, 3, and 19, the possible values for the umbral power after defeating 0 or more Pokemon is all the numbers in that list, 2, 3, 5, 19, 21, 22, 24. And as you can see, none of them match the possible values that we can drop the anomalous power to. 7, 11, and 18, none of them are in that list. So there will be no way to balance the two sides, because there's no way to get them to be equivalent non-zero values. So if that supposition that Houndour power is 3 is true, there's no way to solve this room. So again, we assume that there is a way to solve the room, so just there's a contradiction there, so our supposition that Houndour power is 3 must be false. So Houndour's power cannot be 3 if this room is solvable. So then the only option left is we've eliminated 3, so Houndour power must be 5. Now, let's figure out more information about Drifloon and Mandibuzz and how they contribute to the umbral energy. So, we have our equation, now with our newfound knowledge that Houndour's power is 5. So we set the total of 24 equal to 5 plus X plus Y. And those are the 3 Pokemon contributing to the umbral energy. If we solve for X plus Y, we get that the sum of the contributions of Drifloon and Mandibuzz is 19. So then, we know they're prime, so what are 2 prime numbers that add up to 19? The only option is 2 plus 17. And we can use the same reasoning from the previous slide for the only option of 2 prime numbers adding up to 21 being 2 plus 19. So thus, between Drifloon and Mandibuzz, one of them must contribute 2 power units, and the other one must contribute 17 power units. So Drifloon's power is either 2 or 17, Mandibuzz's power is also 2 or 17, and they must add up to 19. But we can actually take a step further and actually figure out which one it is for Mandibuzz. Is it 2 or 17? And we do this using our inference on evolutionary lines. So Mandibuzz is not the first Pokemon in its evolutionary line, Volibeye is. And Volibeye, which evolves into Mandibuzz, has to have a power of at least 2, because that is the lowest prime number. And Volibeye's power has to be a prime number, so yeah, at least 2. And based on the evolutionary line rule, Mandibuzz's power has to be greater than Volibeye's power, so Volibeye has to be at least 2, Mandibuzz has to be greater than 2. And that implies that Mandibuzz's power cannot equal 2. So thus, we eliminate 2 from the possibilities, and so Mandibuzz's power has to be 17. And then we can use that newfound knowledge to figure out Drifloon's power. So we know from earlier that Drifloon and Mandibuzz have a combined power contribution of 19. And if Mandibuzz is 17, we can write an equation and solve for Drifloon's contribution, which when we solve for that, that is 2. So Drifloon's power has to be 2. And that does not cause any problems with the evolutionary rule because Drifloon is first in its evolutionary line. Finally, that is all the information we need to solve this room. So, and solution, all we need to do is defeat 1 Grand Bull and 1 Mandibuzz. Why? Well, in doing so, the anomalous power drops to 7, because we started at 18, Grand Bull contributed 11, after defeating it, anomalous is 7. And the Umbral power drops to 7, because we start at 24, we know that Mandibuzz is 17, so when we defeat Mandibuzz, I subtract 17 from 24, we get 7. They're the same non-zero value, they're balanced. Okay, and last but not least, we got room 9. And this one, of course, as expected, is the final room. It's pretty challenging. So, let's start. What information are we given? Well, Pokemon presence, just by walking around, on the anomalous side, there's just 1 Clefable and 1 Chimecho. And on the Umbral side, there are a ton of Pokemon. There's 1 Poochyena, 1 Eevee, 1 Vullaby, 3 Dino, 1 Hydreigon, and 1 Misdreavus. So, lot to do. And what are the initial powers that Noelle tells us? Well, when we walk in the room, on the anomalous side, we got 20. On the Umbral side, we got 31. And previously determined relevant power values that will help us for solving this final room is Zweilous is 13, and Cleffa is 2. So first, we can figure out or get more information on what Hydreigon's power contribution is. And again, we figure this out using the evolutionary inference. So we already know from previous rooms that Zweilous, which evolves into Hydreigon, has a power of 13. And because of the evolutionary line, Hydreigon's power must be greater than Zweilous' power, so Hydreigon's power must be greater than 13. And the only prime numbers greater than 13 that's within the range, the established range of 1 to 20, is 17 and 19. So Hydreigon's power must be either 17 or 19. And then next we can actually just figure out what the Umbral, how the power is distributed among all the Umbral Pokemon in this room. And this involves just doing a little bit of testing to figure out. And so we know that all of the Umbral Pokemon in this room, besides Hydreigon, they have to have a minimum power of 2. Because that is the lowest prime number. So that's the smallest possible number power value that they can possibly have under the constraints we've established so far. So if we assume that every Umbral Pokemon has its minimum power, so has the lowest possible power based on what we know, then just add them up. So 17 for Hydreigon, because Hydreigon's either 17 or 19, the minimum is 17, and 2 for everyone else. The total is 31, which is the total Umbral power in this room. So, lucky guess. And thus, for that reason, we cannot increase any Pokemon's power beyond the minimum value we've established. Because if we did, the total Umbral power will end up being above 31. But we've already established from Noelle's analysis of the tablet that the total Umbral power in this room is exactly 31. So all Umbral Pokemon in this room has to have its minimum value based on the constraints we've established. So Hydreigon has to have a power of exactly 17, and every other Umbral Pokemon must have a power of exactly 2. Great. So then, what's all the possible ways we can combine them? So Based on our equation of 31 equals 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 times 2 plus 17 plus 2, we have to figure out, yeah, all possible sums of subsets of Pokemon. So those are all possible ways that we can reduce the Umbral power of 2. We can simplify this equation a little bit by setting 31 equal to 17 plus 7 times 2, because there are 7 Pokemon present that have a power of 2. So another way to phrase what we're trying to do is figure out all possible combinations of up to 1 Hydreigon and up to 7 Pokemon with a power of 2. Again, that's the possible numbers, the possible resulting Umbral energies we can get by defeating Pokemon. And all the possibilities are the numbers listed below. It is a lot, but it's really just the first 7 positive multiples of 2, and 17 plus the first 7 positive multiples of 2, and 17 as well. So, yeah. And again, to solve this room, we need to get the anomalous energy to match one of these values. Okay, so that's that. Next step, let's figure out some more information about how much power Clefable and or Chimecho contribute. So if we have the equation on the anomalous side, it's just 2 Pokemon. So 20, which is the total, is equal to X, our unknown contribution by Clefable, plus Y, our unknown contribution by Chimecho. And to figure that out, again, they have to be prime numbers, so what are 2 prime numbers that add up to 20? And this time, we actually have 2 options. There's 3 plus 17, and there's 7 plus 13. So if we go with option 1, then between Clefable and Chimecho, one of them has a power of 3, one of them has a power of 17. If we go with option 2, one of them has a power of 7, one of them has a power of 13. And now the next step is, let's do that proof by contradiction trick. So let's suppose that option 2 is the correct option. That is, the 20 total anomalous power units is split as 7 and 13. Then the anomalous power after solving has to be some combination of the power values of Clefable and Chimecho, which is, in this case, some combination of up to 1, 7 and up to 1, 13. So the possible ways, or the possible results of reducing the anomalous power after defeating 0 more Pokemon, it is 7, 13, and 20. Those are the only possible values that the anomalous power can have. And if you compare that list with the list of the possible Umbral powers in bold and italics above, we see that there are no matches. Even with that long list of possible values for the Umbral power after solving, there is no match. 7, 13, and 20 are not there. So if we go with option 2, then there is no way to balance those powers to the same non-zero value. So there would be no solution, but we assume that a solution exists. There's a contradiction, so the supposition must be wrong. So option 2 cannot be correct. So we have to go with option 1. So based on option 1, the 3 and 17 is how the 20 anomalous power units are apportioned. So between Clefable and Chimecho, one of them is 3, one of them is 17. And we can actually figure out which one Clefable is, again, using the evolutionary inference. So way back many rooms ago, we have deduced that Cleffa has a power of 2. And we know that Cleffa evolves into Clefairy, So by that rule, Clefairy must have a power greater than Cleffa's power. It must be greater than 2. Or at least 3, because 3 is the next prime number after 2. And since Clefairy evolves into Clefable, Clefable's power must be greater than Clefairy's power, so if Clefairy's power has to be at least 3, then Clefable's power has to be greater than 3. Thus, Clefable's power cannot equal 3. That eliminates 3 from the possible options for Clefable, so Clefable's power has to be 17. And then using that, we can figure out Chimecho's power by using our equation. 20 is the total, 17 is how much Clefable's contributing, and we don't know how much Chimecho's contributing, so we mark that as x. We solve for x, we get 3. So we know Chimecho has a power of 3. And now, with all of that figuring out behind us, we now have the tools we need to figure out how we are going to balance the two sides. So what Pokemon do we need to defeat? Well, it's one Chimecho on the anomalous side, and everyone except Hydreigon on the Umbral side. And in doing so, the anomalous power drops to 17 because we start with 20. We defeat one Chimecho, which was contributing 3 power units. The result is 17. The Umbral power also drops to 17 because we start with 31 and we defeat 7 Pokemon that each contribute a power of 2. So that's 31 minus 14, which is also 17. Another way to think about it is we defeated all Umbral Pokemon except for Hydreigon, and Hydreigon contributed 17, so after defeating everyone else, the resulting Umbral power has to be 17. They're the same, non-zero value, they are balanced, and this is the final puzzle room. So after you do that, you climb to the top of the tree and you can await whatever cutscenes are next. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and if you want to look back at these slides, I put a link to the PowerPoint in the description.